I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. Welcome everyone to another episode of Parent Like a Psychologist, but also a very warm welcome to our special guest today, Dr. Larry Waldman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I want to tell the audience a little bit about you. So you're from Phoenix, Arizona. People probably already from the accent can tell you're in the US. And you have worked for a long, long time in private practice with families, so children, teenagers, and parents, as well as other people. And so you follow or you've got, you've been educated in education as well as psychology, and focus on things like how to translate the behavioral science we learn as psychologists into helpful information for parents. I know too, you've also done, you've talked before on topics like teaching parents to parent as well. And so it's really, I think, that's an interesting idea because none of us know how to do it instinctively. I mean, we do and we don't, but there's a lot that can be taught, I think, in terms of parenting skills. But what's really helpful is translating all of that psychology about behavior and, even relationships into actual easy to action advice for parents.
Right.
Is that kind of a fair summary of what I know you've done other things as well, but I'm focusing on primarily the stuff with families and children.
Sure. No, I think that's fair. Yes. As you said a minute ago or so, parenting, I don't believe, is instinctual. Yes, we love our kids and we want to protect our kids and we want them to grow up and be strong and smart and and successful and so forth. Those are our wishes and desires and so on. But we have received no instruction, if you will, on how to do this. Frankly, the same thing could be said about marriage, but that's for another time. So yes, it is important to get educated about the science, if you will, of parenting. There are theories out there. There are books out there, including mine, of course, about how you might want to go about this important process. I mean, if you think about it, raising a human being is one of the most important things that we adults do in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd like to do that well, with some knowledge behind us, not just by the seat of our pants, if you pardon the expression.
Mm. And I think that thing about it being instinctual, I do agree, but I think what feels like instinct sometimes is just the copying of how we saw it done with our parents, right? And the experience of being parented. We often just that's kind of our first thought of how to respond, but then for lots of reasons we might want to do it differently, and there's definitely no there's no lessons or classes for that, and it's useful to learn. I think what you mentioned, that there's lots of parenting approaches and books out there and that kind of thing. And I kind of hold the opinion too that there's not really one approach that's better than any other approach in the broad sense, when I'm thinking like gentle parenting or tiger mom or this or that. But there is stuff that science tells us is made into good parenting. Would you kind of agree with that, or how do you see it?
Yes, there are several different approaches, if you will, and and if a parent chooses one that they think fits for them, fine. If they're consistent about it and so on, yes, it would be of benefit. I, professionally, am certainly familiar with a large number of approaches, and of course the, if you will, the four different schools of thought in our field. And over the years, I developed a, a particular fondness, if you will, for the behavioral approach to parenting. There's the psychoanalytic approach, and there's the cognitive approach, and so on. I mean, there are others, but for me, it to me, what I've found, it's the easiest approach for parents to understand.
Hmm.
Not so easy to implement, but much easier to understand than the other approaches.
Mm.
And I'd like to emphasize the point you just made again a minute or two ago. Uh, if parents get no education in this important arena, by and large, what they're going to do is do what their parents did to them. Now, in some cases, if you were parented by a psychologist, like my kids, yeah, then you're going to probably do okay. On the other hand, if you weren't that pleased about how your parents parented you, even though you aren't pleased about it, that's all you knew. And that's all you know.
Mm-hmm.
And even though you may not have liked it, data shows you're probably going to do it anyhow. In fact, many times my kids, my two sons, who are very successful and well married and have kids and so on, have said, I didn't like it sometimes, Dad, when you said this and that and so forth as a kid, but I find myself saying the same darn thing. Well,
Yeah.
you know, that's what happens.
Yeah, I've heard it described sometimes as though you say something and then you think, "Oh, where did my mother come from?" Or, "Where is my dad? Did he just say that? Is he here?" Yeah, and that's what I mean about, maybe it's not instinct, but it's automatic. Um, and so then for in the behavioral approach, what are some of how do you explain it to parents? What the guiding principles there are to in terms of raising kids?
Okay. Well, basically, and I'm I'll keep this short. The behavioral approach says that how we behave, is learned by and large. Okay, and we learn this behavior, by typically the consequences of our previous acts. Okay,
Hmm.
so if we exhibit some kind of behavior and we get a positive response to this behavior, we're more than likely to repeat it. Uh, the data shows that if you exhibit a behavior and you get essentially no reaction at all, you're likely to disinhibit it and not do it as much. Now, if you exhibit a behavior and you get a negative consequence, uh, it's variable about how you're going to respond. It really depends, and so on. It's not that it's going to, your negative behavior is going to drop out. What it shows is that you might just become sneakier about it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh, and so on. And so that's, in a nutshell, the essence. So, what the important question then, if you're going to follow, this modality, is this: what's the most important thing we parents can provide our children?
Yeah.
Okay. And again, to keep this short, it's not money, it's not food or chocolate or dessert, it's not presents, it's our time and attention. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Parental attention. Now, I'm talking, kids from basically birth to 10 or so. Things start to change when they get into pre-adolescence, but that first decade really sets the stage. So the most important thing we parents can provide our kids, is our time and attention. We see it
Mm-hmm.
all the time. I mean, oh, look, mommy, look what I did, or daddy this, and so forth. Of course, as even an infant, we know, that when we, coo with the child and tickle them and play with them, that facilitates their development.
Mm.
If you just mechanically, feed a child and hold them, but not really attend to them, this child is not going to grow up well, and so
Mm.
forth. So they thrive and need this attention.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All right, so that's the basis. Now, we also have to understand that children come into this world, as I like to call it, naked and naive. Okay?
Okay.
They don't know what's good or bad, normal or abnormal. Okay? They don't know that. They haven't read any books yet. And frankly, neither have their parents, but that's what we already talked. So they don't know. So all they're doing is just living their life. Okay?
Yeah.
And so what happens, unfortunately, in so many households, okay, is that the person running the show, if you will, is the kid, not the parent. Uh, that's why my first book on this subject is entitled "Who's Raising Whom."
Mm-hmm.
So, what starts to happen, again, if the parent isn't taking charge and applying some kind of consistent process to this parenting, and is basically taking it day by day, hour by hour, and so on, where what you did yesterday may not apply to what you're doing today, etc., and so on, is this: the child is going to want your attention. And what the child is going to realize is this: I get more attention, more parental attention, immediately following inappropriate behavior. Now, they don't know it's inappropriate. They just know this kind, what we would describe as inappropriate behavior, than when I behave appropriately. So if the child is, let's say you've got two kids, and they happen to be playing quietly, I don't know, with they're playing checkers or something like that. And what does the parent do? They look in and they see them playing quietly, and they say to themselves, "Oh, that's nice. I'll get a cup of coffee."
Hmm.
But while they're having their coffee, they all of a sudden hear some screaming. Stop that! Don't do that! And what do? They
Yeah.
intervene, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's just one exhibit of thousands. Okay, one
Hmm.
example of thousands. In that case, what did those children learn? When they're playing quietly and playing nicely, interactively, what attention do they get for that?
Yeah.
Zip,
Compared to zero. Yep.
zip, nada, nothing. But as soon as they started this and that and so forth, what happened?
Mm.
The parent got involved. And,
Yeah.
and
And
And so this, what I call negative attention syndrome, begins to develop in the home,
mm,
where the child comes to learn inadvertently, but nevertheless, that they get more attention out of being inappropriate. Of course, they don't know that as far as they're concerned, it's just life, than when they're being what we would call appropriate.
mm,
Also, the parent starts to expect the child to misbehave and so gets a hair trigger ready to pounce. And on those rare occasions when the child is behaving acceptably, they relax and ignore.
mm.
And there you have it. And there you have it. And
Yeah. And
so, go ahead.
like you mentioned, I was just going to say, you mentioned that the kids don't know that a behavior is good or bad or anything, but it's that they're purely just learning that it is rewarded by attention. Um, and so that's what shapes the behavior. It's what makes it more likely to happen. Yeah.
And
What I
shaping is a term that behaviorists use all the time. You're exactly right.
mm, mhm. And I hear this from parents a lot too, that they're doing it just to get my attention. And in a way, what we're saying is, yes, that's actually accurate. But then, and this is even in schools, and actually, it's a lot of the time in schools. The next follow through thing is, they're doing it for our attention, so we're going to ignore them. How does that kind of play into what kids are learning? And, is that the right approach, or do you think a different method should be used?
Well, see, it's now incumbent upon the parent to be as I basically call it, a kind of a behavior therapist, if you will.
Hmm.
In other words, if you're seeing appropriate behavior in your child, you want to reinforce it.
Yeah.
If your child is exhibiting some inappropriate behavior, but it's not dangerous or harmful or destructive, but it's probably being done to goad you and to get your attention, your response should be, or walk out of the room.
Mm.
And so, what the child starts learning, and certainly my kids did at a very early age, they learned that when they behaved well or what they were doing and so forth. Oh, I like the way you're sitting so quietly and using your fork the way mommy showed you to eat your eggs. Those eggs taste good. Okay, something like that. On the other hand, if the kid's banging, let's say, the fork on the table and so on, all right. Why is he doing that? Does it make him feel good? No. He's looking for a reaction. And so I might look at it and walk out of the kitchen. And there he is in his high chair. Well, that didn't work, right?
Mm.
You know, when otherwise the parent says, "Would you stop that racket?" Well, what did that kid learn? I've got power. I can take my fork and make noise, and that person who's 3 times my size and an adult and so forth, they're having a fit almost. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we probably look pretty funny when we have a fit a lot of the time, don't we, to a little kid? Um, how I mean, yeah, I see what you mean, and I think though too about what can we how can parents kind of avoid getting in that situation? So to try to use the attention that we've got to give kids to try to encourage all the good stuff so that less of that fork banging happens.
I call it catch 'em while they're good.
Mm, mhm,
Instead of what most parents do, look out for the bad behavior so they can pounce and get everything all upset, do the opposite. Look for the good behavior. Okay.
mm,
Back to the example I was given before. Your son and daughter are playing checkers quietly. You come out and say, "Oh, guys, I love to see you playing so nicely with each other and quietly and so forth. When you're finished with this checkers game, let's go into the kitchen and bake some brownies."
mhm.
Now,
Yeah,
you were going to bake brownies anyhow, but they didn't know that. And now they're going,
right,
"Oh,
yeah,
yeah, brownies, yeah, good deal." So now they're getting rewarded for playing quietly and so forth. And they realize, gee, this kind of behavior pays off in a good
mhm,
way.
mm,
So I'm much more attentive to what my kids are doing well than the reverse. It's the
yeah,
reverse, frankly, that comes instinctively.
yeah, yep. How much time, do you have a fee I have one in my mind that I tell parents, but about how much effort we should put into like praising what we want to see and encouraging that or proactive preventive strategies versus how much focus we should put into handling when the behavior goes downhill.
Well, to me, it's something you're doing on an ongoing basis.
Hmm.
You're especially looking for uh, something that's appropriate and relatively new, and they're doing that. Like if they come and happen to, like try to make their bed, and you didn't really expect them to do that, but they did, or they at least made an effort. That's true. 4th of July. Look at you, Johnny. You tried to make your bed. I am so proud of you. And look, you've got the corners here tight and so forth. Look how nice this room looks.
Hmm. So it's jumping on all of the well, yeah. So you're saying like an ongoing, fairly constant basis where you're kind of looking out for the good. And yeah, that's similar to what if I have to, talk with parents about it, I'm saying usually it's like 90 to 95% of the time it's trying to look for those good opportunities. And then, we have to do something when the behavior happens, but that's however we respond is far less meaningful to our kids, I think, if then we've got all of that proactive, positive attention and encouragement going on the rest of the time.
Exactly. Yeah, and so particularly if you start early, but you have to start whenever you begin this process. But if you start this relatively early, of course, as I did with my kids, my kids picked up very, very early, that it paid off to be good. I used to
Mm,
say all the time, my kids have manipulated me continually throughout their childhood. They
mhm.
behaved appropriately and well, and I rewarded them. Yep,
Mhm.
that's how they manipulated me. Well, unfortunately, too many families, you've got the opposite going. These kids are pretty much running the show. The family's only as happy as the child is, and so on.
Yeah.
Or as only as quiet as the 3-year-old chooses to be. Uh,
Mm.
no, but if you leave it the chance, which unfortunately most parents do if they don't get educated, I can pretty much assure you you're going to get this negative attention cycle going where the kid has come to learn Pays off to be bad because that's when I'm in charge and I'm in control, and so on. And any child, given that opportunity, will take it.
Mm. I think because sometimes we think of children as different to us too, but it's, it's a human thing, isn't it? That we respond to reward and power as well as adults. And I know kids are still developing and learning, so they're not as rational as us. But when you use that term manipulation, and it made me think about what you said in the beginning is about what's 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 earning that reward of our attention, really. So it's that reward. And I think about all the things we do as adults because we get that attention reward from other people, or some other reward like compensation and money for work and things like that. Um, yeah, it's really a more human trait, isn't it?
Well, yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, there have been studies on this where people are surveyed about their job and so on.
Hmm.
And many times, I'll as I'm trying to encourage this process, many times parents go, and then I'll say to them, "What's it like at work?" And more often than not, the only time they have an interaction with their boss is when? Can you guess?
Probably when things aren't going well, would be my guess.
Exactly. And I'll
Yeah,
say to them, "How do you like that? How does that feel? To know
yeah,
that the only time pretty much your boss wants to be with you is that is when you've messed up."
yeah,
How loyal does that make them? Does that make them as employees? If
yeah,
you
yeah,
know doing a good job is essentially ignored, you're
yeah,
supposed to do that. Well, see, that's poor management as far as I'm concerned. That
mm,
manager should be out there patting people on the back, letting them know, that he or she appreciates their hard work.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're in this situation where, you know, I'm just gonna. All I have to do is stay under the radar. I'll do
mhm,
it. I'll do the minimal. That's all I need to do. And so that's what. So you see, this theory, if you will, really has a broad application, and it
yeah,
certainly applies to management as well.
yeah,
Unfortunately, many managers haven't been trained either, so they use the same, you know, instinctual technique and mess it up at the workplace as well as at home.
yeah. I think it speaks to then the relationships we develop with people who only interact or pay attention at the negative times, right? Like that, no one likes working for that kind of boss. And I draw parallels then to do kids like hanging out with that kind of parent? Do they feel good about that relationship and that kind of thing? And I think yeah, probably not. And that's another factor as well to consider in how we treat our kids.
Exactly. And while we're talking about options for this kind of process, what about marriage?
Mm,
How how often what's the nature of many of the conversations that go on in marriages, particularly troubled ones? Are we
mm,
talking are we talking about what's going well, or dear, the that meatloaf you made this evening was delicious. I really appreciated how moist it was. It tasted great. I realized that you're working and coming home and doing this, and making dinner on top of that. That's super. You know,
mm,
Catching even your spouse when they're good pays dividends. You know,
mm, mhm.
we play the same game. We come, the husband comes home, hard day at work. Wife had a hard day at work too, in many cases, but yet she's taking care. She picked up the kids and brought them home, cooked the dinner and so forth. The husband sits down and, this meatloaf's a
Mm,
little dry here. Couldn't you?
mm,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I guess it's going to be a cold night in the sheets, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think it is helpful to think about those other contexts, like being at work and in a relationship, that help you understand it from the other person's perspective um, a little bit more. Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit about punishment right in the beginning too, and how that doesn't always, or a negative consequence for doing something. It doesn't always get rid of the behavior or make it less. Sometimes it just makes it sneaky, or sometimes maybe just that then the behavior just doesn't happen when the parent is around. It might just happen at other times, is what I know. But what do you yeah, tell us more about that.
Well, yes, exactly right. First off, many times, when the punishment occurs, and maybe even spanking is being done, um, there's chaos, there's hysteria, you
Hmm.
know, and we want to think about it. What is it we're trying to accomplish here? Okay. And I like to really boil it down, so we understand. The child exhibited some kind of inappropriate behavior that got us so excited. We're yelling, we're screaming, we're now whacking, and so on. And the kid's supposed to learn you are not supposed to hit your sister. Now, how's the
Hmm.
irony there? Okay, we
Mm.
use to teach a kid not to hit his sister. Okay, I won't get it. I think we
Yeah.
can. Yeah. Um, no, no, that's not going to fly. The kid's not learning that. Um, I mean, I could think of dozens of examples.
Mm.
Um, one that comes when my older son was 16, and he had his car, and it's not like I spoiled him. He had his car because he was involved in all these sports and so forth, and he had to get to school early, and so I was spoiling me, not him. All right. So
Okay.
anyhow, but one of the rules that we had is, only one passenger in the car with you while you're driving at 16. Otherwise,
Hmm.
get distracted and so forth. And,
Yeah.
and that was the rule. Okay. So one day I'm coming home from work, and and I'm look ahead and I see my son's car, obviously coming toward my house. And so I pull up next to him at the stop sign, and I look. He's got one passenger in the front seat and somebody sitting on his lap. And he's got
Okay.
people in the back seat. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I rolled down the window. He looked at me and he goes, "Oh my God." And I said, "Josh, home." Okay. I sped up. I got home. By the time he pulled up, I had the steering wheel lock in my hand. He
Okay.
pulled he pulled up, you know, parked his car. I waited for the kids to get up. I didn't say a word. And all I did is attach the steering wheel lock to his car, making it undrivable. And I said, "Josh, you broke the rule. The steering wheel comes off in a week."
Hmm.
And then he said, "Dad, how do I get these 5 kids home?" "Not my problem." And I walked
Hmm.
away.
Hmm.
Done. That's the
Yeah.
lo- that's the logical consequence, okay, for not following the rules. If I had
Mm.
a tent in front of his, 4 friends and so forth, it would have been ridiculous and so on. Okay.
Yeah.
No, no. So, one of the kids called one of his parents, and they came, and so on. In fact, when the parent came up, I actually came out and said, "I'm sorry to inconvenience you, but Josh broke the rule," and and the parent understood fully, and so on. And then
Yep.
Josh had to find a way to school that week. He had to actually ride his bike. Oh my God, who rides their bike to school? That's square.
Yeah, kids who break the rules, that's who. Um, yeah, so logical consequences and that kind of thing, rather than those big kind of emotional reactions, which are, yeah, yeah, would have, maybe, in some situations it escalates the situation because then the kid gets upset and you get more upset and lots of things can go pear-shaped. But yeah, so it's, consistency with the expectations and the rules and paying lots of attention to when your kids are doing it and
Right.
seeing if you can you know offer some reward for that, like your brownie example, when maybe you were going to do it anyway. But yeah, I probably do that a little bit with my kids as well. I comment on things and then go, should we get ice cream? And it's a little thing that we might have done anyway.
Right.
But it's tying the two things together in their minds. Like when everyone's happy, good things happen.
Right. And
Yeah.
and again, you're very astute about this. We're talking about specific behaviors. Okay?
Mm,
Um, this is maybe a little more technical, if you will. But the child needs to know, what he or she is doing well, or in the reverse, doing badly. In the case with the car and my son, I'm not having a his. Now, was I ticked? You bet. Okay.
hmm.
And when I walked in the house and said, "Guess," to my wife, I said, Can you believe what Josh did?" But he wasn't hearing that. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but he knew. I said, "You broke the rule," and he knew the rule, and so on.
Hmm.
Um, and so when we're acknowledging this good behavior, it's not this, hey, way to go, buddy.
Yeah.
What,
Right.
no, hey, I like the way you did X.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Uh, the example I used before, you played quietly and interactively, with your sister. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Now we know exactly how it is. I hear parents think that they're reinforcing their kids by saying, good job, Johnny, proud of you, and so on. That's a compliment. That's not
Mm,
reinforcement. Okay. A compliment, makes the kid feel good. Yeah, okay, I feel good, but it doesn't affect the behavior. When you specify the behavior, that's where the impact is, good or
yeah.
bad.
Yeah. We can't really expect kids to draw that conclusion between getting the praise and what they're doing right at that moment. That's a way of thinking that they're probably not developed yet, right?
Right, right, yeah.
Mm,
One of my favorite stories that relates to this is this. I was working with this mother and so on, and father, and she tells me this story. Um, she she consequenced her son for something by removing TV for a week. Okay.
hmm.
Now, first off, and when she said that, she realized when she said it, oops, because I don't believe in long term punishments. Because after 24 hours, nobody, the kid doesn't remember what it was he did wrong in the first place. All right. And
Yeah.
so she consequenced him for with no TV for a week for something. Okay. And then she tells me a day or so later, he comes to her and says, "Mom, I want to watch TV." And
Hmm.
she said, "No, Billy, you're being punished. No TV till Friday." And then the kid said, "But mom, why?" And then
Hmm.
the mother tells me, "I don't remember why. All I know is you can't watch TV till Friday." And I
Yeah,
said to the mother, "Excuse me, but what inappropriate behavior were you trying to diminish when neither of you knew what it was?"
yeah, yeah. That's so true. I say to parents too sometimes, if the with what you put in place is too complicated for you to remember, there is no way your child will remember. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Keep it simple. Yeah.
yeah,
As I said, the theory is pretty simple, and that's why I like it. Okay? The implementation, of course, is much harder because it's
yeah,
on you all the time. Basically, you're gonna
yeah,
say, you're scanning. All right,
yeah,
I'm behavior. Yep, yep, good, good. Okay, I like that. I got to go specifically reinforce that. Okay. He's being sassy, and so on. Okay. That's not dangerous, harmful, or destructive. I don't need to intervene. All I need to do is get out of here. Okay. And now, see? And so we're scanning. We have a theory. We know what we're doing when, and so forth, and that's how that works. And
yeah.
you'd be amazed how well that does. As
Mm, hmm.
apply it on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great. I feel like we've come back full circle to the what we discussed in the beginning, and then that's the way to understand how to apply it. And it is simple to understand. It's not easy to apply. I mean, it isn't. It isn't. It's effortful. I'll say that for sure. It's a constant thing. But I think you've helped break it down for parents today to in an easy to understand way that they can implement. So thank you very much for that and for joining us today.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be on your show. I appreciate the opportunity.
So welcome. Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Tran Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.